Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
25 years ago, on a frigid Sunday morning, a beautiful Sunday, except that it was really cold, my wife, my 5-year-old daughter Dara, and I, together with a busload of committed Jews from my hometown in Connecticut, we all stood as one in Washington, D.C. on that large strip of grass lawn that looks up at the dome of the Capitol building, in a gathering of 250,000 people from all across America, to tell the American administration and the Soviet Union that the doors of imprisonment had to be opened and that Soviet Jewry had to be freed. Elie Wiesel was there, Natan Sharansky was there, although his name then was still Anatoly Sharansky. Jewish leaders were there, American leaders were there. They were all there that Sunday morning to make their voices heard and their presence felt. Voices and a presence that won a victory for the human spirit and for those enslaved everywhere on earth. And according to some, with a voice and a spirit and a presence that helped bring down the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain and the entire Soviet Union. This December 6th is the 25th anniversary of that momentous day in our nation's capital. And it's amazing to reflect upon both the importance of the event and to realize who was there participating in that gathering. And one of the 250,000 there that day was a 19-year-old freshman at Tufts named Michael Granoff, who today is the head of Maniv Energy, which helps fund one of the most innovative projects in the world, Better Place, which has built the first nationwide electric car network in Israel. And as you're about to hear, that day 25 years ago was a turning point in Michael's life. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Daniel Eisenstadt, who in addition to a most successful career in the financial world, is a profoundly committed Jew and the founder of the Auschwitz Jewish Center. And Daniel and Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
The two of you are co-chairs of Freedom 25, and that's why they are here with us today. Freedom 25 is an effort that means to promote the history and lessons of the Soviet Jewry movement to the next generation. And my first question is obvious. Actually, I'm going to even backstep. You were there.
Yes.
25 years ago. You were not there.
I was not there.
And yet this moment somehow grabs you. Why?
I grew up in the Soviet Jewry movement. I can't remember a time when I wasn't going to marches.
So it was by accident that you weren't there?
It was by accident. I also, in candor, I was a freshman at Clark University, not so far from Tufts, and I'm sure my mind was on other things that if I could take that moment back and get a do-over, I'd love to be there.
Okay.
But in some respects, I literally, I grew up with the movement and felt like this was the most important aspect of Jewish activism. And for me, the reason that Mike and I started talking about doing this was that we both had this wonderful opportunity to spend Shabbat lunch with the Sharanskys, with Natan and Avital in Israel. And go ahead.
Okay. Michael's in Israel all the time. Are you also in Israel all the time?
I'd like to be there more. I'm there at least once every year or two.
Then how do the two of you end up having lunch with the Sharanskys?
Well, it was just a fortuitous occasion. We had a business meeting with them on something different earlier in the week, and they extended the invitation graciously to us. I was there with my family, and they didn't hesitate for a moment to include my entire family, and Daniel came along by himself.
How green am I right now? That's wonderful.
We were blown away when Avital turned to us and said, "What are you doing for Shabbos lunch?" So I was not there. Interestingly, to the story, I was not there with my family. My wife.
25 years ago.
No. This is at the Sharansky,
at the
lunch at the
Sharanskys.
Sharanskys.
Okay.
And my wife and 3 daughters weren't there. And when I got home from Israel, over the Shabbos table, I said, you have to hear who we had Shabbat lunch with, right? And of course, my now 10-year-old, then 8-year-old daughter, Elena, said to me, "Who's Sharansky?" Now, you need to know, Elena goes to Jewish day school. We're involved in our synagogue. You know, there's nothing about her identity that hasn't been grown in sort of American Jewish culture and education. And she said to me, "Who's Sharansky and what's Soviet Jewry?"
It hurt, didn't it?
Right, it hurt. And when I said to her, "Let me tell you," and I started to tell her the story, and after about a minute, she cut me off, as 8-year-olds are wont to do. And she said, "Dad, you know, this sounds a lot like Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement." She said, "Do you know about that?" So I said, "Well, why don't you tell me?" So she then went on and spoke for 10 minutes, beautifully, about Martin Luther King and voting rights and Rosa Parks. And in that moment, and Mike and I have talked about this, I said, you know, on the one hand, as an American, I'm proud, I'm thrilled, she should know that. But as an American Jew, talk about missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. How is it possible that this meaningful movement that changed the world and was formative in my Jewish identity, she not only is unaware of, but she can talk chapter and verse about the Civil Rights Movement and knows nothing about Soviet
That's
Jewry.
a fascinating story, Daniel. Michael, I want to ask you the same question sort of to get into this, because I said in the open, you're very candid about the way in which the moment in Washington, December 6, 1987, changed your life, your identity as a Jew in some way. How and why?
About a month prior to that, someone actually dragged me to what I thought was a reception. It turned out to be a meeting at Harvard, a couple of subway stops from Tufts. And this presenter at that meeting was Sharansky, who I was dimly aware of at the time. But when I understood that the purpose of the meeting was to organize people to go to Washington for this rally, my initial instinct was it's a week or two before my first finals in college, 12 hours on the bus. I don't think so. By the time the meeting concluded, of course, I was chair of the Tufts bus contingent and organized 3 busloads of Tufts students to that rally.
Did you have 3 busloads?
We did.
That's a nice contribution. Okay. But that's just the moment. It has had an impact on your life going forward, correct?
Well, I always had a political interest, and that was the portal through which I entered a Jewish life, really, because I decided that from that point forward that my Jewish identity would be wrapped up in the Soviet Jewry movement, which would, of course, extend well into my adulthood and probably for the rest of my life. So that was going to be my Jewish identity, and then we won.
Going forward from the march on, did you remain active in the Soviet Jewry movement?
Absolutely, and I
How?
take full credit for the fact that it took me less than my 4-year college career to solve it. But no, I was chairman of a committee at Tufts that wrote letters to refuseniks. I actually traveled to the Soviet Union in 1989 with a group of students from Boston to visit with refuseniks.
And how about you, Daniel? Did you stay involved in this movement?
I have to say, I was at Ramaz for high school. And so high school at Ramaz in Manhattan, you could not be involved in the movement. But by the time I got to college, I was out of it. I wasn't focused on it.
Yes.
Except that in 1989, on a student exchange trip, I ended up visiting the Soviet Union by chance. And so most of my involvement was grade school and high school. And after that, it faded.
Michael, what's the 1 or 2 most important elements that you wish, as Daniel describes his daughter, and you have children also, what do you wish this generation understood most about why the Soviet Jewry movement was so pivotal? And again, not only for Soviet Jewry, in some way for American Jewry, Israeli Jewry, and obviously it helped bring down the Iron Curtain.
That's exactly right. It really is the best Jewish success story of our times. And the story that Daniel told was brought even into sharper relief when we came to understand that it wasn't just 8-year-olds that didn't know about it. Really, anybody under 30 doesn't really understand that there was a Soviet Jewry issue, that there were millions of Soviet Jews deprived of their rights and freedoms. And when we understood that, we said, this is something that we need to be able to learn from, that we need to be able to have a historical record of, and that we need to be educating our children about.
How would you answer the same question?
I think we as Jews do have a terrific opportunity in our history to think about the times when we've survived and overcome adversity. We don't have that many opportunities to talk about moments where not only did we survive and overcome, but where we actually took action, where we controlled our own agency. In many respects, this is the moment where American Jewry finds its voice. In many respects, this is a moment which Elie Wiesel said so eloquently, had there been marches like the march 25 years ago during the Shoah, maybe you would have had millions of Jews saved. So, for me, when I think about this, I think about the bystander test. As a result of the Soviet Jewry movement, there are Soviet Jews that come out. There's countless innovation. Mm-hmm. There are 5 Soviet Nobel Prize winners, and Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google. So, the lesson here is take action, find your voice, and you get Google. Mm-hmm. And, the line that I think has often been written or questioned asks how many Einsteins died at Auschwitz. Well, I think, thankfully, because of what happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and 25 years ago, we actually know that you have Nobel Prize winners and you have Google.
By the way, in all journalistic integrity, I want to make sure I say this. We're meeting here in the Shalom TV studios, but these are also the studios of the Russian Television Network of America, RTN, and I've been involved with the Russian immigrant community, primarily Jewish, not all Jewish, but 96% of our audience and those who watch are part of the Russian immigrant population that was Jewish. It's interesting, In Russia, they were called Jews. Here, they're called Russians. So for me, I did not know when I stood on that cold Sunday morning, and it was remember, it was cold, but it was gorgeous. Remember, it was just gorgeous. That so many of our lives were about to be changed, and as much as our lives are changed, it's nothing compared with what we did to bring life to an entire population of Russian Jews, and they really were Jews living in the former Soviet Union. And I am very aware of the fact that not every one of them had a strong Jewish identity. And what always impressed me was the extent to which the world Jewish community said, the degree of observance, irrelevant. What's the purity of lineage? Irrelevant. You're Jews, you do not belong enslaved, and I would like to believe that becomes the model for the world. That no one has a right to enslave another, and if a Jew who was in the former Soviet Union wanted to go to Israel or America or Canada or anywhere, having done it with Judaism, because they wanted a free life for themselves and their children, they deserved that right, and the Jewish people stood up that Sunday 25 years ago, and then throughout the entire movement. And the two of you, you have no idea how much I admire what the two of you have done. First of all, you've each been successful in your own right, but you've given up an enormous amount of time and energy to, celebrate this moment and bring it to your daughter's attention, and I would dare say to many American adult attention.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It was a moment of unity for the American Jewish community, one that I don't think we've replicated since, which is instructive in itself. But it's also, as you said, primarily because it was based in universal principles. And that's why in our effort here, we haven't only gone and spoken to those who were directly impacted by the movement. We talked to Mayor Cory Booker of Newark, New Jersey, who read the speech that Martin Luther King delivered to the National Conference on Soviet Jewry about a year before he was killed, where he talked about these universal principles and fully endorsed the activism of the activists for Soviet Jewry in America.
That's wonderful.
There's actually a fascinating article that came out in Tablet magazine about a year ago by an Iranian American who basically wrote, his name is Sohrab Amari, and what he really wrote about was that for the Iranian American community that is looking to overthrow the Iranian regime, the template that he wants to use are the tactics used by the Soviet Jewry movement.
Interesting.
So what's fascinating is the Iranian American community seems to get it. Question is, do we get it,
yes.
right? And also to Mike's point, one of the things I think we're always amazed with, especially as we sit here, today with what's going on in Israel on the border of Gaza, to think about the unity in the mall in Washington, 250,000 Jews, from Jabotinskyites to peaceniks, right? From Reform to Orthodox.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a really remarkable moment of unity.
You know, it's interesting. You know, Natan Sharansky now heads the Jewish Agency, and he is encouraging contemporary Jewish life to follow the model that existed, the very model you just described so beautifully, Daniel, where no one cared about which movement you were in, and no one cared which organization you were in, no one cared about whether you were left or right or Republican or Democrat. You're a Jew involved in trying to do something that would better the world. I want to mention two words, and I want either of you to reflect upon them, because I believe they are also words that many young Americans, and again I'll say this, I think many American adults as well, they do not resonate in their ear. Jackson Vanik. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about Jackson Vanik for a moment.
It was the first time that American foreign policy actually took human rights into account as the primary motivating force. What's fascinating about it is when Senator Scoop Jackson, who is a hero of the Jewish people, when he introduced the amendment in the early 70s, in the days of the Nixon-Kissinger administration, the administration's policy towards the Soviet Union was one of détente. They really wanted the U.S. and Soviet Union to coexist, and they saw this as aggravating that policy. And Secretary Kissinger went to the heads of the Jewish community and said that, and said, you really can't be disrupting superpower relations. And they went to Senator Jackson kind of sheepishly said, thanks, but no thanks. And it was Senator Jackson's leadership that said he was going to move forward with it anyway, and if they didn't support him, they were on the wrong side of history. And so they did come around to support it. But that was really the beginning of the meaningful and successful part of the movement that culminated 15 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we think about American foreign policy today, and we think about whether it's Libya that we think about sanctions in Iran, we automatically assume that issues of human rights in a sovereign nation are fair game, are something that American foreign policy addresses. That's the notion of an idealistic foreign policy opposite of realpolitik. And what rarely gets mentioned, as Mike just said, is that this is the moment where a human rights-based foreign policy is started. And so when we watch today, as there are human rights issues that are raised, it really is the legacy of this movement, primarily a Jewish movement. So here's a moment where we own the human rights agenda. Mm-hmm. We started it, and look where we are today.
There's something very interesting that happened really exactly the same time as Senator Jackson was preparing this Jackson Vanik Amendment. And Andrei Sakharov, who was the leading Soviet dissident Nobel Prize winner in 1973 in the Soviet Union, is speaking about the fundamental freedoms that should be applicable to everyone. And in doing so, he says something that must have at the time seemed completely absurd, but in retrospect is remarkable and explains the reason actually why what we're doing at freedom25.net this December is a virtual online march. What he said was that, well, you know, we're not very far away from the point in time at which all information will be accessible to everybody instantly. Mm-hmm. And to imagine, to think about that, it must seem impossible to most people at that time. To him, it was clear that that was the trajectory we're on. And he said, to get there, what you really need are these freedoms, including the freedom of movement, the freedom to be able to live where you choose. Well, lo and behold, Soviet Jewry movement succeeds, the Soviet Union collapses, and what springs from that? We have someone whose parents we interviewed for this project, Sergey Brin, who goes and founds Google. He actually came from the Soviet Union prior to the march and attended the march with his father as a young boy.
How old? Do you have any idea?
He was 14.
Oh, amazing.
And his parents described him having been very moved to have been there holding a sign, "Let our people go."
Another true irony of ironies, right? The current COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, her parents, Joel and Adele Sandberg. Joel Sandberg is an ophthalmologist in Miami. Adele is a teacher. They were the leaders of the Soviet Jewry movement in South Florida. So Sheryl Sandberg literally grew up in the Soviet Jewry movement.
Amazing.
And then to think, right, 35 years later, Sergey Brin, who effectively her parents were working for, ends up giving her first job at Google.
I get chills.
You can't really make that up,
chills.
right?
So I now understand what you're trying to do, but what's the actual thing you're trying to do? How, if there are viewers right now who want to participate somehow in the anniversary of that extraordinary time, Freedom 25, what can they do? What are you trying to do beyond letting us know about it? Is there anything else you're trying to do?
Yeah, the long-term goal here is to put this movement on the map of the Jewish community so that it gets taught in day schools, so that it gets out there, and so that when our younger children get to the same point as Daniel's daughter, they do have an association that understand this, and more importantly, as they grow up, they're informed by the lessons of the movement. In the near term, what we're doing on December 6th, coming up, the 25th anniversary, is a virtual march. What that means is we're asking people to come, and we have a lot of content on the site now, videos with Sergey Brin's parents, with Cory Booker, with many others, and more coming in the weeks ahead, to come, take a look at these quick videos, sign up, join us in virtually marching. And then we're going to move from there into creating curricula that can be used in schools and camps and in cyberspace to be able to teach these lessons.
That's lovely.
And it's interesting, if you think about it, the primary goal that really animates us is to focus on the next generation of Jews. But there's also an argument here that this is broader than that. This is really about the next generation of Americans. Because this is a seminal moment, and Cory Booker was great about reminding us of this. It was not just Jews in the mall that day. The 250,000 people included ministers and priests and nuns, and it included
Americans of every religion.
and Americans of every religion
Absolutely.
and background. And so really the effort we're going to have, and the real way we've thought about this is 2012 for us was about sounding the shofar, if you will, letting people become more aware. So our goal is that when we get people to come to freedom25.net, we'll get 1 million people with awareness and marching virtually. Then in 2013, the goal is to be a catalyst to really cause educators to engage this history and the lessons and to build it into curricula. But one of the interesting things we decided early on was Freedom 25 is not another organization. It is an ad hoc coalition of Jewish organizations, of partner organizations, 20 of them now, that our first operating principle is that we will go out of business at the end of 2013.
That's a lovely one. Incidentally, it took a while for the entire Jewish community to get behind the Soviet Jewry movement. There were those who were championing it for a while. Then Elie Wiesel wrote The Jews of Silence. And then you had the people like Avi Weiss, and you've done some extraordinary work at Auschwitz with the museum. And Avi was one of those who was protesting early on when the nuns wanted to create a convent there. But, I'm marching with Avi Weiss, and I'm being arrested with Avi Weiss at a time that everybody's not marching. So you are picking up something. And I was wondering whether, number one, you want to speak to that at all, and number two, how has the Jewish community today responded to what the two of you are trying to do now?
Well, so two things. First of all, you mentioned Avi, and I have to tell you that my memories of Avi Weiss go back to when I was working for Alan Dershowitz, and we were representing Avi Weiss on suing the Cardinal Glamp in Poland.
Absolutely.
So I've known Avi for a while, and you're right, he was early and often there. But look, I think one of the things that people need to understand is that, like a lot of great movements, it did not start with the organized Jewish community. It started as a popular movement, as Sharansky so well put it, with housewives and students. In fact, there's the great story that Sharansky is being interrogated by the KGB, and he's told by his KGB interrogator, they show him a small article, and the article shows a couple of dozen students protesting, and the interrogator from the KGB says, Anatol, you have no chance. Look at this is rabble, right? Sharansky famously said, right, and I think at his first press conference in Israel, that's when he knew he was okay, because he knew the power of housewives and students. And fundamentally, this started as a housewife and student, as a popular movement. It took decades for the organized Jewish community to fully embrace it. Not all, there were elements that did. And so I think it's a good template as well for a change.
It also, we learned, really grew out of the civil rights movement. If you think about those housewives who were part of starting the letter writing campaigns in the late 60s, had also been marching in Selma a few years before that. And there was not just a thematic connection between them, but literally it was a lot of the same people that saw, especially post-67 war, saw that the the Jewish people had their own human rights issue and rushed to address it.
It's interesting. Glenn Richter was one of the founders of the student struggle for Soviet Jewry, and also someone who knows Avi very well, said that the student struggle for Soviet Jewry really was an outgrowth of the civil rights movement, and really talked about the fact that when they learned about the hijacking by a group of Soviet Jews shortly after the Six-Day War, the attempted hijacking, I should say, of a plane.
Led by Joseph Mendelevich.
Joseph
Mendelevich.
The response from some of the students to hearing that story, saying, okay, well, we've been protesting for civil rights, we really need to organize for Soviet Jewry. And this happens at Yeshiva University and at Jewish Theological Seminary.
Absolutely right.
And actually, one of the points we often, make is Abraham Joshua Heschel had really several animating social causes in his life. The one that today many American Jews know is marching with Martin Luther King for civil rights, but equally passionate was the issue of Soviet Jewry when he, frankly, on Yom Kippur woke up the entire conservative movement and said, basically, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You need to move.
He was way ahead of the curve. And he led us. He, Avi Weiss, and there were others as well. And what you're doing is really now memorializing something in an extraordinary way. Kol hakavod to both of you. It's wonderful. As we close, I want you to give the web address again.
The web address is freedom25.net. We should note, you don't have to wait till December 6th. You can go there today and just put your email address to indicate that you're virtually marching with us, or you can reflect on the movement. And our director, Dave Weinberg, has done a terrific job in setting the site up to have all sorts of content that I think will be very interesting to people.
It's also worth mentioning that part of what we've done is really acted as a clearinghouse for information. So the 20 partner organizations we have are having numerous events to commemorate this anniversary. One of the things that we have at the website at freedom25.net is an events list as well as a tab for educators.
Fabulous. Good.
So it's really a good resource for folks that are looking for a way to connect.
It has been a joy meeting you, by the way.
Great
Daniel.
to meet you, too.
And I want you to come back. I want to talk about the Auschwitz Museum.
I would love to do it.
And some of the other experiences you had, but you're lovely, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love you very much. It's wonderful to have you back. You have done extraordinary work in so many ways. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha to both of you, but mazal tov to you. Yasher koach. And that was our meeting with Daniel Eisenstadt and Michael Granoff, the co-chairs of Freedom 25, which is both celebrating the March on Washington in support of Soviet Jewry 25 years ago and helping this generation learn the history and lessons of that extraordinary Soviet Jewry movement. I hope you make sure you participate, and as Michael said, you don't have to wait till December 6th, but I'm going to go December 6th. As always, I would love to hear any thoughts you have to the ideas expressed by Michael or Daniel. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.